Firstly, who are you and what do you do? And welcome, by the way.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
So I am Bevan McKechnie. I made a game called Compound, which is a VR game that's currently on Steam, shortly to be on everything else, hopefully. And yeah, the my game company, if you could call it a company, is just me, pretty much, and my wife helps out with tech stuff and things like that. But yeah, basically, I'm a solo dev working on Compound, which is a retro style, like a boomer shooter style roguelike, to put it simply.
What's a boomer shooter?
That is actually a very good question.
Yeah, it's a genuine one as well because I don't really pay much attention to that terminology. So yeah. Tell me.
Well, you could probably ask 10 boomer shooter fans what a boomer shooter is and get a different response. I mean, strictly speaking, I don't think Compound is technically a boomer shooter because a boomer shooter, I think, in most people's minds, those FPS games from the 90s, so like Quake and Blood and Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior and and then there's the modern renaissance of boomer shooters like Dusk and Iron Fury. Most of the stuff that 3D Realms makes, that sort of thing, is what most people would consider a boomer shooter. My game is not, yeah, as I said, it's a roguelike, and I don't think too many people associate roguelikes with boomer shooters. But it's got a lot of boomer shooter genetics in it, I'd say, or like a boomer shooter vibe and aesthetic. Obviously, I mean, it's very, using a lot of those chunky pixels, which and limited color palettes and things that give those games their unique look.
Well, it's no secret that I am a fan of the game, for sure, so I'll say that
Thank you.
for disclosure, but of course I will be as impartial as as I possibly can. The first thing that really took me aback with Compound is that I remember glancing on it in the store for quite a while before I actually bought it, because whenever I see that sort of retro style, I had assumptions that it would be a fairly shallow experience and that it wouldn't look very good. But when I did take the plunge and I saw it for the first time in VR, I was stunned how much that art style translates so well into 3D. It's so beautiful and crisp, and it's something that if you haven't actually seen it in a headset, and this is only my opinion after all, it's difficult to understand how such a simplistic art style can look so good in 3D, but it's one of the most visually refreshing VR games that I think I've played. Just very pleasant to look at. So
Well,
that
thank
was,
you very much.
oh, of
That's
course.
that's a very nice thing to say. And I understand what you mean at first. What you said about the expectations of that kind of aesthetic. There definitely is, along with the renaissance of this idea. Let's revive the vibe of those games of the late 90s and early and late 90s. Um, there's also another set of people who look at it as a low effort way to make a quick buck or something,
Mm.
and unfortunately that gets there's a bit of overlap there, and so there's some negative associations, unfortunately. And the truth is that it's that as an art style, it's very easy to produce the bare minimum level of what would be considered retro. A lot of the times, you can usually tell when one of those is a cheap money grab because they don't understand what made that aesthetic so pleasing to look at in the first place, and it's just, oh, just pixelate it and it's retro, which is not
Uh-huh.
at all what it's about. Um, but just putting that aside, about why it looks so different in a headset. And as this is also something that frustrates me a lot because it doesn't, the screenshots don't do it justice at all,
Right.
I feel. And I get a lot of people saying that. I think it's not just me that thinks this, and obviously you just said so yourself,
Mm.
which is very reassuring. But I think VR right now, I mean, the VR headsets in general have some limitations with extreme darks and extreme brights and just the way things look when very contrasting brightnesses are put near each other, and the clarity of the image and things like that. And the simplistic, very colorful, very saturated graphics, I think, make everything a lot easier to see in a way that's kind of hard to explain. I suppose like you have a lot of VR games where things are very dark, and then you have very bright objects in that scene, and it creates a lot of what are called, like God rays or kind of bloom within the headset,
Mm,
and it makes the image look a bit of a mess sometimes. So I think the very crisp, simplistic graphics work really well inside a headset. Obviously, another thing that's lost completely in the screenshots is the depth and the 3D nature of the image, which brings that whole illusion of like those older games being turned into a reality in VR.
mm,
Because that was my original one of my original goals, was to get those old games, and instead of just playing them, on a flat screen, which I still do today. I mean, I love those games to death, and I
mm,
play them all the time. But really being in those retro game worlds, like using VR, sort of the best of both worlds, is sort of what I thought it was. And I would like to claim that I knew from the start, that it was going to be such a good match. But honestly, it was just luck, really. I mean, I really like that kind of visual style, and I tried it out in VR, and it came out way better than I expected. So, just to anyone listening to this, there's a free demo, so you can kind of try it out and see what it looks like. Even if because a lot of people that I get a lot of comments, people saying that I don't like that style usually, but when I saw it in VR, it worked really well. So maybe someone could be convinced by actually giving it a try. But yeah, I know I'm really pleased with the look of it, and I think games going forward as well, I'll continue the style. I think
mm.
I'll develop it more. Well, in fact, I've already have made some more advanced prototypes of where I want to take the aesthetic, but basically the same sort of deal, where you've got limitations that are fake, like because obviously modern computer graphics can do all sorts of things,
Mhm.
but staying away from transparencies as much as possible and using a very limited, very curated color palette makes everything very coherent, which you don't get if you have a whole bunch of assets made by a whole bunch of different people and you just slam them into a scene. Everything's slightly, in very subtle ways, different from each other, from the other objects, and it doesn't make a scene as coherent as it could be if it was made. Well, I mean, it's easy to be coherent when it's made by one person, but also the same color palettes and the same visual style and the same texel density and things like that. Just brings everything together and makes it seem like parts of a whole.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope that wasn't too much of a rant.
No, it was very interesting to listen to. And just to add to what you said earlier as well, in regards to trying the demo, I was one of those people who assumed uh, the game would not look good in a headset, and I was massively surprised by what I actually experienced. So yes, definitely in this case, don't judge a book by its cover. It's quite astonishing how things can translate into VR. Why did you get into game development?
That is actually a good question. How old was I? It was when Quake 1 came out. Quake 1 was a huge influence on me. I must have been about 12 or 13, 12. And Quake came out, and I saw some pictures of it in PC Gamer magazine.
Hmm.
And I was like, this can't be real. It looks like a photo. This is my 12-year-old me
Yeah.
perceiving Quake as the best graphics game that I've ever seen. I was really impressed by that. And then my cousins got it on their computer, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen in my life. I was like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And at that point, I became obsessed with the idea of Quake and playing Quake. And then so I got, and then I eventually got a computer. I saved up, and what did I save up for? My parents bought me one, and I think I saved up to get another one later on. But anyway, I managed to get my hands on a computer and Quake, and it's all I did all day, every day was to play Quake, and I played it to death, of course. One day, another issue of PC Gamer magazine came with something called Quake C and a compiler. And Quake C
See.
is like something that id made. It's like an in-house version of the C programming language, but for coding logic for Quake in the Quake engine.
Okay.
So the engine itself was closed source, but the game logic was open source. And I got my hands on that. So the CD and a compiler which turns source code into uh, something that you can execute on your computer. So basically, it was the tools to make mods.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this is pre-internet. Well, I mean, the internet existed, but not in rural New Zealand where I lived.
Hmm.
And I didn't have access to any programming books. But I had the source code and I had a compiler, and I had no idea what was going on. But yeah, played with the what looked like magical incantations, pretty much, essentially, numbers and symbols that made no sense to me whatsoever. And so I changed the numbers and symbols of Quake, which is like this pretty much a religion to me at this point, and I'll try and compile it, and it would end up in an error 19 times out of 20 or so. But there'd be that one time where it didn't have an error, and I'd be like, "Oh, what did that do?" And I'll try and figure it out. And then another 9 times out of 10, I would load up the game and I'd have no idea what changed. I'd try it. I don't know what's different. What have I done? But then there'd be like something interesting happened. Like the one of the enemies is acting strangely, or one of the guns is acting strangely, and very slowly, through just thousands and thousands of repetitions of that, I kind of reverse engineered the basics of C programming. And I found that to be fascinating. I don't think I'm the kind of person that was naturally a natural born programmer or anything like that.
Hmm.
You do get people that are like that, that are very ultra logically minded, ultra mathematically minded, and they are drawn to that sort of the act of programming itself.
Hmm.
But for me, it wasn't programming that I was drawn to so much as the idea that I could change or make this world, and programming was the means of that.
Hmm.
So I became very interested in programming at that point because, like, well, not only could you mod a game, you could make a game, and obviously I was aware of total conversions and like very large mods and stuff at that point. And I was like, well, a total conversion is just one step away from a full blown game. So yeah, basically that's where I kind of dived into the whole programming thing, and then I was like, well, I need 3D models and I need textures and stuff, so I got into doing that, and I need to make maps, so I started making maps, and it was all
Wow.
from necessity, um, and they were all just a means of making this game world, and I wanted to make this world, and that was the beginning of it, and that just leads pretty much directly up till now, really. I mean, it's just a continuation of that, the desire to make a world and to make this reality, and that's why I was so drawn to VR, because it's even more of a reality than a normal 2D game, because you're really there. I think ever since I was a kid, I always was really attracted to the idea of a virtual reality, even though
Mm.
it was pretty much science fiction at the point, where you were transported inside the game and it was super real, and you weren't controlling your body with abstract button presses, but you're
Yeah.
controlling your body with your body. So, and obviously, and then the movie The Matrix came out, and that appealed to me very much as a
Mm.
as a teenager as well, because that's basically the end game of VR, isn't it? Like, it's
Yes,
so good that you can't tell the difference. So I mean, and it's where eventually we're heading, right? I mean, we'll get there at some
for
point.
sure.
And so the next best thing to that is VR, and the next best thing to VR is 2D games, and that's what was available at the time. So that's kind of where it all started. But yeah, I mean, I won't say that I don't find the actual art, or the act of making a game, to be very interesting as well, because it is. It's really fascinating to make 3D models and to make textures and art and programming and doing all of it, which is maybe one of the reasons why I'm a solo dev, is because all of the elements are appealing to me to do.
Why is your game called Compound?
So about the name, in retrospect, I don't actually like it that much, but it serves its function. And why I chose it is so simple. It's simple to the point where it's a bit embarrassing. But I was writing up random names of things that are in the game, and I was wondering if I would stumble across something, because as you might know, the game is inspired by Nuclear Throne, and Nuclear Throne had a different name. I actually forgot what it was, but it was some other name. At the end of the game is the Nuclear Throne, and they go, oh, okay, well, let's rename it that. And I was wondering if I could find something in my game that I could call it, and I noticed the word compound was popping up all the time, because you're going into the compound, you're breaking into the compound to get the formula this evil company has, and
Hmm.
and another name for a formula is like a compound, and a chemical compound, all that sort of thing. And yeah, I just noticed the word compound popping up a lot. I sort of put it on my list of possible names, and it never really went away. And I kind of went, okay, so this is the working name. That was kind of the name I chose
Mm.
temporarily. I thought maybe I'll come up with something better later on, but ended up being the final thing. So it wasn't really like, aha, this is the perfect name, but rather it was like, oh, this name is will serve okay until I find something better, and I never found anything better.
It's the one that
Yeah,
stuck.
that's the one that stuck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I did find the name. Sorry, I did find the file recently that had a lot of those alternative names. They were quite cringy, for lack
Tell
of a
me,
better
tell
word.
us. We have to know.
Oh God, this is embarrassing. Vault assault.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Transgressor. Transgressor. I just
Transgressor.
ran just a random list of things.
Uh-huh.
Stockade, lockup, dead metal, steel and grit, galvanized, crucible steel. I don't know. It was just a random list of,
Crucible
oh God, there's
steel.
oh, it's just so. I mean, it's all cringe. So those are awful. They're all awful. I'm just one thing I've noticed is I'm very very bad at naming things, and so I thought for the next game, the eventual next game, I won't name it. I'll reveal what it's like, and then I'll petition the internet on Twitter or some other random, on social media, or like on maybe on Discord and stuff as well, and say whoever finds the name, I'll give them present on Steam or something like that,
Yeah.
because people are really good at finding like really clever names, and so outsourcing outsourcing that sounds like a good idea because I'm just very bad at naming things. And also, I think with names of things like games and stuff, as long as it's not awful,
Hmm.
you repeat it so often and it pops up so often that it becomes just, people just say, oh, this thing equals this game. The one thing I do kind of regret is that it doesn't really. You want a name that when you search for it in Google or whatever, only your thing pops up. A compound
Hmm.
is so generic that a million different things pop up, so you have to go compound and then VR game or something.
Hmm.
So that's one thing I kind of regret. Another thing is, like if you hear the name, it should instantly sort of at least give you a hint of the vibe of what it is. I think compound maybe, but I don't know. It could have been better, but yeah, it functions. It's
Yeah, it's fine. It's
okay.
fine. I never had any particular judgments about the name or anything. I
It's not awful, which is good enough.
have you formally made any 2D games prior to Compound?
Plenty. Just I'd never. That was one thing that I finally got over with Compound. I said I would make things constantly. I've been making things ever since I was, early teens.
Hmm.
But I would never release anything to anybody. It would always just disappear into obscurity on my computer. I was too terrified to put it on the internet. I think there was some kind of a barrier there where I was worried that people wouldn't like it or that it wasn't good enough, or I wanted it to be perfect. A bit of a perfectionist, I think, and I wanted it to
Hmm.
be perfect before I would show anyone. And so I made countless things, but none that ever was seen by anybody,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And the source code for all of those is lost, which is stupid. I really wish I'd kept it because there was a couple of projects I made that I was actually pretty proud of. But there are no screenshots. There is no code anywhere. There's nothing except a memory, in my head that existed. So the answer to your question is kind of yes and no. I mean, yes, they existed, but I couldn't prove it to you.
Hmm.
I mean, I do have some screenshots of a few projects from a time ago, but
Hmm.
none of my best ones. Compound was the first time I just said, I'll just put what I have here for fun, just online and get feedback. And the instant I did it, I realized that I should have done it decades ago.
Hmm.
But here we are.
I think, at least in my opinion, it's more that you just have standards and you want to ensure that if someone does play your game, that it's going to be of sufficient base level of quality, which I sincerely wished was true for, I can say, amateur devs who are releasing games on the VR market presently.
Described myself as a bit of a perfectionist before,
Mhm.
but I think another word you could use is elitist. I think I need to get over a particular. I need to grow out of a particular phase I was in, where in my mind, a real dev, a true dev,
Mm.
uh, according to the gatekeepy version of myself, of the younger self, a real dev wouldn't use Unity or Unreal.
Mm.
A real dev would code their own engine, and had never used a pre-made engine before. Everything I'd made from my whole life up until Compound, I was using my own custom engines because that was the real way to do it. Which
Uh-huh.
yeah, sure, you don't have to pay royalties or you don't have to do this and that, and it's impressive to your your programmer peers. I made my own engine or whatever, but it was always forever this game of catch up of like, this new technology came out, this new rendering method came out, or and I don't have to make it support that. And every time I start a new project, I'd be like, well, this engine is coded poorly, so I better start a new engine. So every project would have a brand new engine from scratch coded for it every single time. And I was reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, and it always had to be perfect. And so I was just getting nowhere. I was stuck in this never-ending loop. And actually one thing I'm very grateful, yet another thing I'm grateful to VR for is that I was coding yet another engine number 8 million, on
Mhm.
game number 8 million, and I was finally starting to become a bit of an adult at this point, and I was like, maybe I should tone things down a little bit, make something simpler first, and then release it, and then work up something bigger later on. So I was making a simple engine and a simple game. And then VR came along. I was like, oh, this game would be a great fit for VR. And then I looked into adding VR support, and I was like, this is yet another thing to add. And I, and I was like, you know what? I'll just try using one of these engines. And it took me all of maybe 2 or 3 days to go, oh my god, I've been wasting the last decade and a half. I should have just done some of this earlier. I mean, obviously those things didn't exist back then, but I should have switched to that much earlier. Instead of spending 95% of my time making an engine and 5% of my time making a game, it was 100% of my time making a game, and then I was finally able to make progress orders of magnitude faster than I was before. So I mean, that's an important thing. Like, tools, the tools have made making games so much easier compared to how it was. And that leads back to what you were saying before about the poor quality of things
Mm.
on Steam and stuff. I mean, the barrier to entry is very, very low,
Mm.
which is very positive in some ways. It's saying that it's so easy to make a game. The tools have become so easy that it allows people to make bad games, if you know what
Yeah.
I mean. Like before, just to get to the point where a game even worked, you'd have to do a huge amount of learning and become incredibly, uh, skilled in a whole bunch of fields to be able to make an engine to make a game.
Mm.
Well, now you just have to have an idea and you can kind of slap things together
Yeah.
for which is a double-edged sword, right? So you get the people. I think the main reason for the bad quality games is there's a variety of reasons, but there are people who are exploiting that and just throwing anything on that's popular at the moment to try and make a quick buck. There's definitely that. There's
Mm.
definitely an element of that there. Those people that are just will do anything just to try and get some money. And then there are other people who maybe very young and they're getting into game dev. They've made something they're very proud of. It might not be very good, but for their age level or for their learning level, it's pretty impressive. And they want to put it on Steam as like a badge of honor, and Steam allows that. And there've been plenty of cases where a game that looks like rubbish uh, has changed gaming in general. I mean, Minecraft looked very, very primitive at the time, but it's totally changed. It was, it's one of the most important gaming events of recent times,
Mm.
and other games. Undertale is very, very basic in terms of the tools that were used to make it, and the quality of the assets is nothing mind bending.
Mm.
But it was very, very influential on how games are now, and I think Valve wanted to no longer be the gatekeepers of what could and couldn't be an influential game. So, I mean, there's plenty of room for something that is janky and, looks terrible and is poorly implemented, but has some really amazing core idea that transcends all of that.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure there is that in there. It also allows a lot of a lot of noise that drowns out the signal, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
There's not such thing as a bad tool, but yeah, sometimes the tools can be used to do bad things, unfortunately.
absolutely.
uh,
Such is
mm,
true for all of life and all of our tools. In regards to what you mentioned about your experience making game engines and such, and the elitist comment that you used to describe a part of your personality, or at least attitude, a while ago, I would actually, and I think I've said this to you in passing in conversations before, I would contest a little bit what you've said in regards to the time that you've spent doing those things being wasted and the overall feeling towards being resistant to releasing something of X quality. I think that one of the reasons why Compound stood out so much to me is that even though you might say it's a fairly simplistic game mechanically in terms of how it's ultimately played, there are still so many little elements of quality and care which clearly come through: the stability of the art, the performance of the game in general, even though, of course, for those kind of graphics, you wouldn't expect it to be overly intensive on the graphics. But all of the little details which have been put into Compound, which clearly show an awareness for the importance of that detail individually, but also how that fits into the picture as a whole, so that they all become greater than the sum of their own parts. That, for me at least, is really apparent, and I don't think that that would have been possible to achieve had you not gone through all of the process that you went through and being elitist. And to quote you, I stand more on the side that having a barrier for entry into art forms or even skill sets, even though it can be restrictive and possibly be a little bit elitist or perceived as elitist in some cases, I think it's ultimately necessary in order to maintain a certain expectation of quality in the
mm,
things
mm.
that we pursue. There is a reason why we usually will set a certain minimum standard of entry for certain groups or behaviors or establishments, because we innately understand that there needs to be a certain prerequisite, be it through age or life experience or general knowledge or whatever, in order to stop the quality of something that we care about from slipping.
I don't have a very strong opinion yet. I have mixed opinions in this area. You have on one end of the spectrum, you have something like Steam, where the
Mm.
floodgates are completely open, and that I mean the bad side of that, of course, is that you get a lot of, well, quite frankly, you get a lot of crap.
Yeah.
But you also get, occasionally you find these interesting gems that wouldn't have got on a very strictly curated store. And some of my favorite games, in fact, my very favorite game of 2020, was it 2021 or 2020, was a game like that, where it had some technical issues,
Hmm.
and it had very amateurish chunks, and the person who made it wasn't very skilled, I think, technically, but it just had uh, something about it that I enjoyed so much, and
What's
it
it
was such a
called?
great game. It's called Arthurian
Ah, I had a
Legends.
feeling it was going to be that one. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's on a very strange engine, and it's been optimized. Well, it has been. It runs terribly for what it is. It looks like
It
it's
does. Yeah.
from 1996. It
Mm.
runs very poorly on my machine that runs Half-Life Alyx, no problems.
Yeah.
But it has a soul, and it's so great. I love it. It's made by someone who understands the visceral funness of games,
Yeah.
maybe not so much the technical side of it. And so there's definitely that sort of side. So I mean, there is bad and good, and then you look at the other side of the spectrum. You have something like the Meta, Oculus Meta store, and that's very, very heavily curated because they have, an image that they want to keep, and they've got their company brand and all that sort of stuff. And so it has less games. But I mean, and there's a definite bar there where you can say, well, all the games that are on there are very, you're safe in that they're not going to be shovelware, or they're not going to be amateurish.
Mm.
My personal opinion is that I would like something. a little bit in the middle, maybe.
Hmm.
There's definitely I definitely like a lower barrier of entry and more allowing for more experimentation and allowing for rough edges if there is something else there that's special.
In comparison to making 2D games, how much more difficult, or is it more difficult, to make a VR game?
That that is an interesting question because to say it's easier or harder, I don't know. I mean, I think most people would say it's harder because you're doing a lot that hasn't been solved, completely. You
Hmm.
can't look up how to do it. Like I think a lot of devs, especially sort of indie and amateur devs, they'll look up, they'll get a book on how to read it, or they'll look up on a YouTube tutorial or whatever. The tutorial is everywhere on how to do everything, right?
Hmm.
And every problem to do with 2D gaming, flat screen gaming, has been solved. So oh, how do I do this? You just look it up, and some very smart person will do a very good implementation of it and explain it very well, and that solves your problem. But with VR, either the problem hasn't been solved yet, or there are a million different solutions and no one can agree on what the solution is, or it has been solved, but everyone's holding their cards to their chest and not making very good tutorials on it. One example would be
Hmm.
like you get VR games where the problem, the classic VR game problem, you have a wall in the game, and you can use your controller to move around in the game, and if you use a controller to move into the wall, then you bang against the wall. But what happens if you don't use a controller and you physically walk forward
Hmm.
into the wall? Because there's no wall there in real life, so that you can't physically stop the person from moving. So what do you do? And you know the uh, the solution that I like the best, when I first came across it was in Vertigo, which is an excellent game by the way.
Hmm.
Is that you push your head against the wall, and then you're kind of pushing the whole world away, so that your head can never get inside the wall. And quite a few games do that, and Compound does that, and Vertigo does that, and I'm trying to think of other games that do it, but many games do it. There's no way I could look up where that was, and so I had to solve that problem myself. And I think every other VR dev has solved that problem, and I would be very interested to see how they've all solved it, because it's probably everyone's a different, done a different method
Hmm.
to get the same result. So there's that kind of difficulty there. But there's other things where some problems solve themselves because it is VR.
Hmm.
Like for instance, okay, reload animations. What are we going to do for reload animations? They got a 2D game, and you got to make the reload system. And there's like, well, can you cancel the reloads when you do this and that? And like, you have to manually code what the game does in these different situations, and how you want it to behave, and then you have to make the animations and for the hands and the gun and how it all interacts well with with a VR game. You have to make it respond in the fact that if you put the magazine in, then it knows the magazine's in and stuff. But I
Hmm.
mean, animations, you don't need to do anything because you physically are doing the animation yourself. You're acting out the animation,
Yeah.
and a lot of things like it's some things will solve themselves, which is interesting because it's so real.
Yeah.
So there's some things that are easier, some things that are harder. I would generally say that it's harder for most styles of development. You may have picked this up already, but I'm the kind of person that wants to do everything from scratch and reinvent the wheel and do everything my own way. So I never look up how to do something. So I always figure out my own way.
Hmm.
And
Why?
sometimes I don't know. It's just I do not know. I don't know. It's something about me. But I do it anyway. And
Okay.
so sometimes I'll think of a solution that's actually kind of interesting or different to the proper correct solution. But 8 times out of 10, my solution is just weird. But that's just how I function apparently. And so that particular drawback of not being able to look up how to do things doesn't affect me so much as it would most developers, because I've got this weird thing where I want to do everything my own way anyway. So I don't know why I'm like that. I always regret afterwards. Like I find out there's some simple solution to my problem, or there's a built-in functionality in the engine I'm using that does it for me, and I didn't know, and I coded this whole system from scratch that does it. Like it's, I don't know, it's not efficient, but at least I understand how everything works in the system. I think it's just a bad habit from coding my own engines, where you didn't have anything, so you would have to make everything from scratch, and I'm still trying to get out of that habit of making everything from scratch. I don't even look it up. Like, like I've got this problem to solve, and I just solve it, which is I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's probably stupid, but it's definitely more interesting, I would say, than normal flat screen development, because you've got these unique and interesting problems. And for people who like to experiment with that or want to do their own take on things, it's also more. I think players are more open because everything's not so set in stone. Like in a 2D game, like a first person shooter or whatever, there's a set, these are the controls, you've got WAS and everything. And if you did something else, people would be like, what the hell is this? and
Mm.
and you'd be downvoted to oblivion. Well, in comp not in compound in VR, you can do something a bit different and a bit new, and people will be more open to it, which is also a benefit as well.
Mm.
So it's a very long-winded way of saying it's probably harder, but it's not always more harder, and it's definitely more fun.
Does it take a lot more processing on the system side to deal with player input and interactions in VR versus 2D games?
Well, if anything, hmm, maybe in the big picture, it's about the same because it does
Oh.
add some complexities, but it also removes a lot as well because it's not you're not dealing with complex button interactions and rebinding. Like if the controller position is just a position, right? It's just a place in space, so
Hmm.
you don't have to deal with like say if you're doing something on the keyboard, like move up, move down, move left,
Hmm.
move right, move right. Sorry, move forward, move back. You've got six degrees of freedom, so you need like a whole bunch of buttons, and you need to be able to ask the computer, is the button down or whatever, or maybe the players rebound the button to something else, so you have to make a system for that and stuff. Well, if it's just a position, it's just a position, right? Like,
Yeah.
so some things are less complex, but yes, obviously there are some things that are more complex. For instance, if I was going to give you a concrete example in Compound, you move your hand to the gun with a magazine or a clip or something in it onto the gun or into the gun. That movement is handled all by VR by itself, right? And if you were to try to do something on in a 2D game, if you wanted to have that kind of movement in 3D space, that would require a whole lot of buttons and be very complex. So that side of it is much easier in VR, but the side of actually reloading, the concept of reloading, like in most first-person shooter games, you press R, it plays a canned animation, and then it's reloaded. Well, in VR, you have to go, well, is the magazine in the magazine well? So the magazine has to keep track of where it is, or the gun has to keep track of where the magazine is. And then the gun and the magazine have to be aware of each other. And that kind of complexity doesn't exist in a normal 2D game, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be, objects don't have to be aware of each other and interact with
Mm.
each other dynamically. It's just an animation, right?
Okay.
So complexity is added and complexity is taken away. It's kind of a bit hard to say which is more difficult, but
That's okay.
probably maybe VR is more complex.
Mm.
Definitely less standardized. So less.
Mm.
So I think most people who have experience with other games will have more trouble with it, and less problems that have been solved by other people. So there's no standard way of doing this. So you
Mm.
can't look up tutorials as much on how to do things and things like that. So I find it very interesting because it's so different and it's
Mm.
so based on being physical that a lot of people, you can tell when a game has been ported from flat screen to VR
Yes,
because all
you
the
can.
interactions feel, a bit canned. But the other way around, porting a VR game to 2D in a lot of ways isn't that difficult. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions about what the player can do that get removed, but things like a reload animation in Compound. Actually, I have another example of that in Compound. There's the mutator that changes how the game is played. There's a whole bunch of them if you're not familiar with the game. But usually, you reload by manually reloading. But there's a game mode called Extra Arms, and you get these two extra phantom arms that reload the guns for you, and they play little reload animations. Unlike a 2D game where you have like just an animation from the start, and you just play the animation, and okay, the gun is reloaded. In Compound, because the magazines and the guns and stuff are all physical and they're all aware of each other and interact with each other dynamically, all the animation does is bring a magazine to the gun. That's all it does. And then the gun goes, "Oh, a magazine is here." and it clips it into the correct spot. The animation isn't actually doing it. It's the gun and the magazine interacting with each other dynamically, and the animation just happens to be putting it in the right place. So it's interesting how it works. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting when I was making it, how much of the reload process, it wasn't just a canned animation, it was really reloading like under the hood as well, when all I needed was a canned animation, and it looks like a canned animation, but it is actually doing it for real, which I thought was fun.
In your opinion, what do you think is one of the key challenges which is yet to be solved for VR? One of the most important key things which is yet to be done well, if anything?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think most people, the vast majority of people, would say it's the locomotion problem.
I disagree with that a lot, but anyway,
You
yeah.
think so?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I think a lot of people that I associate with, that's my opinion, is that
Hmm.
what I think of other VR developers is that the big VR problem is the locomotion problem.
Hmm. Why?
Uh,
Could you explain that? What is the locomotion problem per se? What ex-
of nausea and people having problems with VR, making them sick or making them uncomfortable when they move and things like that. And I think a lot of people see that as this big problem that needs to be overcome, and that there's some technology will come and solve it and
Hmm.
fix the problem. And there's definitely technologies that would fix that, um, although some of them may be further down the line than others. But I choose to not see that so much as a problem, because people forget that if you get some random person off the street who has never played a computer game
Mm-hmm.
and you get them to play a first-person shooter,
Mm-hmm.
I think a good chunk of them would get nausea.
Yeah.
One example being my wife, who not that long ago, like, well, a fairly long time ago, I suppose, but I got her into computer games when I first when we first started dating and stuff. And she played Portal 1. It was her first PC game that she played.
Mm-hmm.
And and she never played a first person shooter, never used a mouse and was and stuff like that. And it made her very sick. I mean, probably Portal is an extreme case, right? But even, I mean, with the portals and everything, but just the walking around was making her sick.
Wow.
Uh, and and she quickly climatized, got used to it. She stopped getting sick. But I think a lot of people forget that so many people are exposed to computer games from such a young age now, that the idea of just playing a 2D game and getting motion sickness is alien to them. But I think if you just got some people from some third world country where they've never played a computer game before, randomly dumped them in front of a big screen, and you got them to try and play a first-person shooter, I think a reasonable chunk of them would probably get motion sickness until they climatize, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing with VR, in my opinion. I could be wrong. I mean, there's certainly a subset of people who never get over, um, motion sickness, and I'm not saying those people don't exist, but the majority of people, given time, will acclimatize, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's not it becomes a non-issue. So then the question comes back to, what do I think is the biggest thing that needs to be solved? And I can't really think of anything that is a major problem
Mm.
in terms of mechanically. Like, I don't have anything that's like in terms of the software and making a game some massive unsolved problem. I don't have anything about VR software that
Mm.
I think is a giant issue that needs to be overcome. The biggest thing is that we need more interesting games, and the hardware needs to come along a little bit. We need higher FOV,
Mm.
and a better resolution and things like that. But I think that the only things we need are just more interesting
Imagination.
games, just to show how cool VR is. And VR
Yeah.
on its own will improve as technology improves. But uh, yeah, maybe the actually I can think of one thing.
Mm.
We do need to sort of kind of find an agreed upon standard. This is the standard way that you control yourself in a first person shooter, and these are the standard options that exist in every single game, and not having them will get you downvotes, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's something that I think needs to be solved, but is automatically solving itself anyway. Like the movement being based on your controller, your headset. Yeah, so it's developing, but a lot of the problems that I see are solving themselves. And the only problem that remains is that we just need to have more people willing to make VR games. That's the only issue, is that we need more VR games, and we need more VR games that are interesting and more fully fledged games, as opposed to
Mm.
just experiences and stuff. I mean, experiences definitely have a place, and that's very important, that sort of have that sort of thing. But having real meaty games that you can really get into and play like a full campaign or
Mm,
whatever, like Half-Life Alyx and Boneworks and Vertigo and all sort of things. There's those kind of games where you can really get stuck into them and play them for a long time.
yeah.
Just need more of that. Just quantity and quality, of course.
One of my complaints about quite a few VR games is that they don't seem very well optimized, at least by the standards of how I've known games to perform versus the visuals and what they're doing
Mm-mm.
from decades
Mm.
of gaming. Do you feel that optimization for games in general, and we can focus on VR specifically, do you feel that optimization or the performance of games has gotten better or worse or stayed the same relative to what we are doing in the present moment from your experience working with 2D up to VR?
Well, obviously, the level of optimization, the level of like technical expertise to make a game work is just completely different. Back in the days, of very early 3D engines,
Mm-hmm.
just having the thing run at all was a technical miracle, like the Quake engine or whatever. And a whole bunch of like every single trick you could possibly think of has to be used just to make it run at all. And it's great that you don't need to do that anymore, and you can focus on actually making the thing. Um, the problem about a lot of poorly optimized games is more about lack of care in making it. I think like
Okay.
just throwing things together in nonsense ways.
Yeah.
So or push it or just going or not accepting. For example, just wanting this particular graphical feature
Mm.
no matter what. And it's like, well, it doesn't run good enough to have this feature. So, but we would definitely want to have this feature. But they also don't want to spend the time to add the performance to be able to allow it, or they've been pushed by, say, a third party. I mean, I think there's a lot of cases where maybe a publisher or someone else is saying, "Oh, it needs to look good in the screenshots,"
Yeah.
so that people click on it, and so maybe they're pushing a little bit too far of what they really should be adding, and performance takes a hit, and somehow they're okay with it. I mean, for me,
Mm.
that I can't understand that, but
I don't
but
understand it either.
I
Mm.
think there are a lot of forces from a lot of different angles on some people, and it puts them in difficult situations
Mm.
where some devs might be doing things that they don't even agree with themselves,
Yeah.
or maybe they are fooling themselves
Yeah.
in some ways. Optimization is something that does need to happen from time to time, obviously, but you should do it when and if the need arrives.
Mm.
Like, for instance, if I'm like, oh, I'm definitely going to add this new feature to my game, and then the game runs fine, it runs very smoothly, and the moment I add the feature, things fall apart. Then obviously you need to look at what you're doing and change it so that it's not like that. You can't go, oh, it's rubbish, but I'll get around to doing it at some point, surely. But it's just going to be crap for the rest of development up. Like, I don't mean to do nothing until the very, very end and just
Yeah.
let it get worse and worse. I mean, if everything is satisfactory as it is, if things are good enough as they are, then you don't need to go beyond that until the need rises again, is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying. As
Yeah.
doing the minimum amount of optimization that is required at any given time to have a good experience that is not laggy or bad or would be considered unoptimized.
Yeah.
Um, and then go in at the end. Obviously, so many things change during development as well that leaving things like optimization for the end is always better because what can and can't be optimized changes, and
Yeah.
optimization is based on a whole bunch of assumptions, and assumptions can change if the contents of the game change.
Mm.
But doing nothing at all and then releasing it is just bad.
Yes.
I mean, from from the player's point of view, that's bad, and I think that's bad.
Mm.
To just go, oh, well, sorry, we didn't have time. Here's this unfinished thing. Is
Yeah.
I don't, but yeah. Just going back to outside forces, there are sometimes I think where devs are told, from someone who has more authority than them, that oh, it's done now, and it's being released today, and then they can be like, "What?"
Mm.
And so I think, and then people then get very angry at the devs when they're kind of stuck between the customers and their masters, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's really sad that that sort of situation is so common. It seems. and that's why I'm very glad that I'm very lucky to have somehow got myself in the situation where I don't have people holding sort of power over me, which is good. I mean,
I
it does mean that it gets delayed and delayed and delayed, but better to have something delayed than to be bad, right?
sure, sure.
The one thing that baffles me is, so I understand you need to pay your workers and you need to make money to continue, right? So
Mm,
it's so saying that money is important, that we should always make the best product is a fantasy, and I understand that, and
yeah,
so I understand the people whose job it is to make sure that people make money, because I mean, if you're in a big company and people have to be paid so they can feed their families and things, it's logical. But one thing that isn't logical to me is, they say, oh, we've got to, it's more important to chase short-term gains, but the
mm,
short-term gains are always coming at the cost of the long-term gains. I
yep,
mean, you go, oh, we'll release it now and we'll make money now, and then, but that's burning all of your bridges and ruining your reputation as a dev,
yep,
and that means further down the road, it means you're gonna make less money, isn't it? I mean,
yep.
if making money is your objective, shouldn't you be trying to make the best thing as possible and not like not
Manipulate.
yeah, like sort of lying and then like just accepting, oh, people are going to hate us, but we've already got their money, so that's fine.
Yeah,
But that's short-term gain at the cost of long-term loss. That seems like just a bad decision to me. But
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a businessman, but that just seems dumb.
I absolutely agree with you. Again, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear this. Yeah, I'm right there with you. And it's super obvious the consequences of going for the short term gain. The reason why I
Mm,
ask you this question in particular is because whenever I express a certain opinion of something or what could be better for VR, like my most recent video where I spoke about some ideas or concepts which I think would translate well into VR and be compelling and interesting and blah de blah de blah. There is always an element of insecurity when I express these things because as a non-programmer, as an end user, it's all very well me saying VR would be even more awesome if we did this and did that and used this idea and such. But I don't truly know how much effort or feasibility there is for the concepts that I suggest. Like where I mentioned the commander concept in my last video, where rather than just being on a screen and you click things, you're standing in front of a big map on the table, and to interact with that map, you use a pen or a pencil to draw on it. So you draw an X on that map and it will order an artillery strike there, or you put a little model of a supply crate anywhere on that map and it will order a supply drop at that location. For me, it sounds cool and interesting as an end user, but I don't know how feasible it would be to code such a thing and whether I'm being reasonable in asking these things.
well,
So,
in my
mhm,
opinion,
go on.
those are completely reasonable, and downright easy. I would say, like,
Okay.
those sorts of things. It's just that I think a lot of the reason those things aren't being made is that, say, you're talking about this RTS.
Hmm.
This VR RTS, it comes down again to just to money. I think like you can have like a dev studio that's like, oh, okay, we're going to make an RTS, and the decision comes, oh, should we make it a VR RTS or should we make it a flat screen RTS? I
Hmm.
think most people who want to play a VR, an RTS, will be people who just want to sit back and relax and might choose that option. And another thing is that there's so many more people without headsets than headsets, and so I think people go, oh well, we could, it's more sustainable to go for that at this moment. And so even though the VR option would be more immersive and more fun, I think a lot of devs go for the safe
Yeah.
option of making the non-VR version,
Yeah.
uh, just which is sad. But I mean, VR users and VR owners are just skyrocketing, and eventually there'll come a time where one person will be like, "No, I'm going to make a VR RTS," and they could do that. And if they if they have the courage to go and make it very, very tactile
Hmm.
and very like VR-ish, then that would be super fun. And there's no technical reason why that can't happen. I think it's just
Okay.
fear and maybe and monetary issues, or just
Hmm.
worrying about whether they can pay the bills. But I think something like that doesn't nothing like that exists. and there's definitely an opening for it, and
It
there's
seems
definitely enough
super
users for it.
obvious to me.
Yeah, I think it's just that they're just choosing more more money. I think, or maybe that's, or just the assumption that they would get more money. I think
Hmm.
because yeah, you say, oh, like only what, maybe like 5% of the users who have 5% of users who have a PC also have maybe a headset or something. Maybe, I mean, you can't go off the Steam numbers because
Hmm.
there are lots of people who don't connect their headset to a PC at all. But maybe just assuming like there's 20 flat screen users for every VR user, and so people go, oh well, that's 20 times as much money. But that's assuming that your game will stand out the same amount. But I think that's kind of false logic,
Yes.
because
Agreed.
VR, there's so few games right now for VR. There's very little competition, and so you get a lot more attention.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, and you're competing with so fewer people, so you may actually end up making more on VR than a flat screen for those sorts of situations. I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I'm not. I don't have access to any data or anything to say that for certainty, but I think like if a dev released a game like that, it would do very well.
I
So there's no
concur.
technical or reason otherwise, I think, why something like that shouldn't exist.
Well, that's really reassuring to hear as an end user because, as much as I feel strongly about the things that I express, that I hope that VR can do and achieve, I also hope or wish that I can do so in a manner that's realistic to what is of what is capable with our technology. So to hear you say that is really reassuring, and thank you. Why are things like leg movement animations often so janky? Why do they leave those things as a second thought? Whereas I feel that they're really important from a programmer's perspective. Is it something that hasn't been solved properly in VR yet, or are they being lazy, or?
Oh, you say second thought and things like that, but that is one particular problem that's very, very difficult to solve. Because what you've got is the positions of the hands,
Uh-huh.
and you've got the position of the head,
Uh-huh.
and you have to kind of figure out some algorithm that kind of guesses where every other joint and the human body can bend and twist and move in so many different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and you can I mean, you'll look very goofy if you do this, but you could, if you stand in the middle of your room and keep just your left and right hand, not your
Mm-hmm.
arms, just your hands and your head in the same spot, and move around as much as you can, you'll find that you can there's an infinite number of positions that your body can be in
Mm-hmm.
where that's satisfying the criteria that your hands and head are in this particular position. It's very, very tricky to find a very natural spot for the body to be in for that particular for those hand and head positions, and then to make that match a walking animation. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can, like most games, like most computer games, flat screen games, you have a walking animation that some animator has looked at how humans move, and they've handmade an animation that looks very, very realistic. And when you walk, your body moves up and down, and there's all sorts of organic things happening. And you can't. It's very difficult to kind of just get this very well-made animation and then tell it to go, oh, do this animation, but put the hands and head in this particular position. When you walk in real life, the body moves up and down. But when you're walking in VR, just by a thumbstick around, you're not physically moving up and down. So if you make an animation where the body moves up and down like it does, which looks natural, but then the hand and head are not moving up and down, then you've got another very, very strange and goofy looking movement as well. It's a bit of a difficult situation. Like, you could have it so that what the other players see, the other players' hand and head movement, hand and head position, make it match the animation, but then it doesn't match the place in real life. Or you can make it, match the place where it is in real life, but then it's not matching that. Then the animation looks strange. And then you've got things like you're going up and down stairs, or you're jumping, and how do you? There's a thousand things you have to kind of take into account, and it's a
Mm.
very, very, very difficult problem. So it looking goofy or looking bad isn't that. I don't believe that the developers are lazy or that they gave it a second thought. It was That was the best solution that they could muster,
Mm.
uh, and even that probably took a huge amount of work. Making a really good solution, a very, very convincing solution, I don't know if that's been solved yet. And even if it was, even if you could get someone to do that, that would be maybe a full-time job for a single person for quite a long time. So, I mean, having like, indie or even double A studios not having a very, very convincing animation for VR players, I think it's kind of understandable. Like, if I was told to do that, that would be a real challenge.
Hmm.
I have some ideas for the next game that I want to make. I want to do a bit more. It's called inverse kinematics, where you have
Yes.
like
Okay.
it's sort of the positions of the body inferred. I have some ideas to make it a bit more convincing than a lot of the solutions that I've seen. I've got some ideas, but until I do it, I can't know. I think a very nice solution to that problem won't come along until some AAA developers start putting some heavy money into it, or
Hmm.
someone much smarter than me comes up with a very, very clever solution that's simple. Who knows? But yeah, from my point of view, that's a very, very tough problem. Not laziness or anything at all.
So perhaps I need to readjust my expectations then, because when it comes to my complaints about that stuff that you've mentioned, as a user who doesn't know how to actually program such things, I made the assumption that because we have been doing human animations for decades at least now, we've been doing inverse kinematics for a very long time as well, and we've also been doing motion capture. I suppose I kind of made the assumption that we had already nailed how to do a general cohesive human animation. And so when it came to seeing how janky it could be with those things in VR, especially with legs, I'm very unaccepting of them. But hearing what you've just said, I may have to perhaps temper my expectations a bit, or perhaps those techniques don't apply as much in VR as I assumed that they would.
It could be better than it is. I think it does take effort and time and resources and learning and things, and I wouldn't be able to solve it all that well.
Well, this is exactly why I
Mm,
wanted to gather your insight on the matter, because, as I mentioned, it's very easy for me as an end user to sit here and say, well, just do this and just do that and yada, yada, yada. And it may sound good and simple to me, but again, for someone with your experience, you have much better insight. So, yeah, it's very useful to hear your side of things on this to hopefully balance a few of my perspectives, because I'm more than willing to be wrong or to be tempered. Yeah, it's
um,
really interesting for me. If I had the ability to program, I could foresee myself really sitting down and doing and just experimenting for a long time on finding systems and solutions for that, because animations have always been very important to me. I don't know why.
mhm.
They just resonate with me. I feel that they are a vital component, and the idea of sitting down trying to find and build systems that would work well in cohesion and performantly is something really attractive to me if I had the ability to program. So yeah, because as you may or may not know, small details matter a lot to me. I think that even though we call them small details, they are in fact quite large. We just don't notice them as much. We tend to notice the biggest thing on the surface and think that's more important. But I'm of a different opinion. The small things make the big things, so they need to be taken care of. But yeah, I would definitely do that if I had any kind of mind for programming, which it would seem so far, sadly, I do not.
Well, I mean, what is that based on? That idea that you can't do programming.
Whenever I've attempted things, programming games or even doing a little bit of programming training online and any kind of mathematics at all, and having to do sort of equations and methods in order to make a system or a command run, it's so profoundly stressful and beyond me whenever I try. Whenever I think about trying it again, as much as I like the idea of achieving the things or the possibilities, the actual process doesn't have much attraction to me. Or maybe that's just my insecurities getting the better of me there. But yeah, whenever I've tried, especially the mathematical side of it, even basic maths, I'm so bad at. And very, very, very stressful. So that's why.
Oh, okay. Well, I do. It's not entirely. I mean, some people look at it as a mathematical, purely logical kind of thing,
Hmm.
and I suppose that is fair in that it is purely logical. It does exactly what you say. But there's another way of looking at it, and that it's a programming language is a language, and if you kind of look at it as from a kind of lingual point of view, like where
Hmm.
you're explaining, you're talking to the computer. It's like learning a language. I mean, it is learning a language because you're learning a computer language. It takes time to get into that kind of that mindset of how it wants to be spoken to and how you need to talk, in that
Hmm.
language. But given enough time, you build up a vocabulary, because you can think about it like and kind of ways of expressing what you want to say,
Hmm.
and that's just a matter, I think, of just exposure, time being exposed to it, like learning a language. We're having enough exposure to it and speaking it. Put that in double quotes. Speaking it. When this
Yeah.
point, just actually doing it, doing the programming. I think the vast majority of people can learn programming, and it's not quite as intimidating or scary as it seems when you first approach it.
Hmm.
And I think programmers also do that a bit, where they kind of make it seem a bit
They do.
cooler than
Yeah.
it
Yeah. For
because I mean
sure.
you want to feel special, right? You want to feel like you can do this amazing thing. I have been guilty of that in the past, especially when I was younger. Of like, oh, I did this, I programmed this cool system, aren't
And
I
you made
cool?
your own
Um,
engines as well, didn't you?
well, I did, but I mean, it's
Which
not.
is
Uh,
impressive.
yeah, but it's not magic though. It's not like
Oh,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
doing
I know.
something that can't be done by
It used to be the
anyone.
norm.
Given an Yeah, I mean, I think if you're motivated enough and you stick with it, you don't
Hmm.
have to be some. Because I mean, I'm living proof that you don't have to be very smart to be to be able to do this
It's
stuff.
true. You
So,
are incredibly
uh,
dumb. Hmm.
yes, exactly. See, and so I think you can get away with being dumb if you just put in a lot of effort instead to make up for the dumbness,
Hmm.
which I am proof of. So if you spend enough time bashing your head against it, it'll eventually you'll have breakthroughs, and then you go,
Yeah.
oh, okay, yeah, and then it'll come slowly, and then eventually you're like, oh, I can make stuff now. It's strange.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. That is true for anything in life, really. If we're
hmm.
motivated enough, irrespective of our overall skill, if we have the motivation very deeply intrinsically, then we will find a way, no matter what. A question from one of my patrons here. Vulcan has asked, how important are good haptics in VR games, in your opinion, as a dev? If you have any opinion.
I'm not sure if I'm qualified to say this because I don't use haptics to the maximum potential in
Hmm.
my game. I think they are important, and they definitely add another layer of immersion there. Like, for example, if you've played the Lab that Valve
Briefly,
released,
briefly. Hmm.
their implementation of the feel of the string of the bow. I was really impressed with how very well that was done, and that
Hmm.
added a lot to the feel. I think like details like haptics improve a game definitely because currently most feedback is just in the controllers themselves. So it's pretty minimal at the moment, to be honest. But that can be used to quite a good effect. You can get the full vests and everything, and those are much more popular than I thought. I get a lot of requests almost
Hmm.
weekly for support for the B haptics vest, and I haven't used one of those before, so I can't really
Me neither.
speak from experience.
Hmm.
But I imagine they add a lot to the game. The only thing of concern that I have with those sort of haptic sort of devices is if you're willing to put them on and everything, then I totally believe that they improve the experience. But it does add another layer of preparation into getting into VR. I think currently VR needs to be reducing the amount of effort it takes to get into a VR
Yeah,
game,
agreed.
and requiring players to have the custom trackers on their feet and on their legs, and you put
Hmm.
like track, and then you put on a vest, and then you put on the gloves that give you haptic feedback on the gloves. Once you're in the game, that was super cool, but it's so much work to do
Hmm.
to get into a game.
Yeah.
I feel like it makes things difficult. What would be ideal for me is yeah, if they spend a lot of effort on reducing the
The
amount of
barrier for
effort that takes to
entry.
get into a game. Yeah, the barrier, making the barrier of entry a lot lower is probably, in my personal opinion, and people will vary on this a lot, I think. Lowering that barrier is currently probably more important than improving things like haptics for now.
Hmm.
Like if you can get full body tracking with no trackers
Hmm.
on your body, not having to strap things to your body, you just have some cameras looking at you and they do mocap in real time. That's like the dream, right? You can get all the benefits of tracking without having to prepare anything at all. You just put
Yeah.
on your headset and you've got your controls in your hand or whatever, and then go, and then it just works. So streamlining things is probably more important for now. But if you can figure out a way to get the haptics without trouble, that would be the holy grail, of course, because being able to feel your environment it would be great. I was really fascinated by people who had their hands on headsets early. People like Anton Hand making
Hmm.
hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, and his videos on the really complex weapon interactions, and just being able, manually, like not pressing a button, like press R to reload. Instead of that, you're physically,
Yeah.
you're reloading a weapon. You need to know how to use a weapon and stuff. I thought that was, the tactile kind of physical nature of that was fascinated me. And sadly, it's Bradley playing budget cuts. I remember, where you. I remember there's that scene where there's a where you go into the ceiling and there's a hole and you can see enemies through the hole in. Well, you're inside the ceiling, so from your perspective, it's the floor. You can see a hole, enemies through a hole in the floor, and he tried to put his head through it, and he bumped his head on the ground, and and I thought that was very silly. And then I eventually got the headset myself, and I did exactly the same thing. Even though I'd seen him do it, I was so immersed that I ended up doing exactly the same thing. So it's amazing how like VR, especially when you first try it, how much it convinces your brain that you're in a different place all of a sudden. I had hyped myself up to just obscene levels. I thought it was going to be the best thing ever. And then just before I ordered a VR headset, it was the HTC Vive, when it first became available
Hmm.
for purchase. And I was like, oh no, I've hyped myself up too much because I remember I've had a lot of experiences of hyping myself up for something, and it can never, the real thing can never live up to the hype. I think it was the first time in my life where it exceeded my expectations.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I had very high expectations, and I was like, oh, it can't be as good as my expectations, and it really was. And so I was like, wow, okay. I mean, it's obvious that there are some limitations to VR still, and I mean, back then it was very screen door effect was a big thing, and resolution was very low, and modern VR is a step above that, of course, but it's still got a long way to go. Even then, it's just the immersion is just so far beyond everything we have so far, and it's only going to get better and better and better as
Hmm.
next gen stuff comes out. So I think the future of I mean VR is fascinating, and the future of VR is going to be even more fascinating. I mean, you get people that go, oh well, VR is a fad and VR is a gimmick and stuff, and
Nope.
I mean I understand that there's some people who aren't as convinced by what it offers, or maybe they've tried some cheap VR, which is kind
Hmm.
of a bit sad that some people can try something like a bad version of it and then think that's what it is. But there's some people that try good VR and they still think that's not their thing, and that's fine. It may not be their thing. So I think VR is kind of at that point now where a lot of people look at it as a silly gimmick or it's not that great. But you got to remember that it's so early and there's
Yeah.
so much progress that we can have still from now that I think it will take over the majority of gaming eventually. I mean, not yet, of course, but it'll get there, I think. This is kind of a tangent, but it's kind of related how user interfaces and things are implemented in VR at the moment. They're still trying to figure that out. You can tell.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, there's a lot of hangover from 2D games. Like
Yeah.
and GUI stuff where you got like buttons and clicking and stuff. So I mean, we need to figure that stuff out as well. But that's what's so interesting about VR right now is that we're figuring new things out constantly, and it's the Wild West or the cowboy days or whatever you want to call it, where things are constantly changing and kind of being made up, and there's no like set correct way to do things, which is,
Hmm.
is exciting as a dev anyway.
You may be aware of some of my complaints about about how a lot of 2D or interaction concepts are still being used in VR, and it doesn't really make any sense. From your perspective, personally and as a dev, why do you think that is?
I mean, I'm not an authority on this, so I don't want to say
No one
with
is.
too much. I don't want to say with too much confidence, but
Hmm.
in my personal opinion, just as someone who has experience making computer games, I think the larger companies are very set in their ways of
Hmm.
how things are done or how things are supposed to be done, and that's one thing. Less agility in being able to sort of switch and change and move around, and there's no like best practices. And I think a lot of those larger companies and things kind of stick by these kind of this is how things are done. And when there's no way of doing that, they kind of default to how traditional games were done
Hmm.
is one thing. And I think a lot of another thing is that it's difficult to think of a whole new paradigm of doing things. And I think a lot of people when they're in a rush, sometimes for instance, a dev who has a publisher on their back saying you have to get it done by this deadline,
Hmm.
do it now. I think maybe a lot of people fall into a trap where they have to just do what they know as opposed to trying, experimenting with a whole bunch of things. But I haven't had any experience working in a large company, and
Hmm.
I'm very lucky to say I haven't had any experience with someone, putting a deadline on me because I'm self-published. That's what I assume anyway. Is that there's a lot of pressures that come externally, and so people sort of make sort of choices that they're not super happy with, but it's like, oh well, this will do for now, and maybe this ends up being what ends up in the final product.
Why have you not fallen prey to those behaviors?
Variety of reasons, I think. One is that, as I said, I've never worked in a game company, so I don't have any sort of methods drilled into my head of this is how things have been done. Also, just the kind of person I am. I'm not the kind of person to sit down and learn the best practices. Yeah, it's not a very. I think if there were investors or something involved, or people, or another thing is that I'm totally self-funded. I mean, I worked on Compound after work in my spare time. So it was just something I did as a hobby that turned into a job.
Hmm.
So I didn't have to appeal to some publisher or some investor or something that this is a sound investment. Like if they said, "Oh, and what are your strategies for making sure that this will be a successful product?" I'd be like, "I don't know. I just want to make a fun game,"
Yeah.
which probably from an investor's point of view would look like a major red flag. But I feel that leads to a better game, at least in my opinion. I don't think I could make a game that appeals to everybody or like the
Hmm.
lowest common denominator or whatever you want to call it. But I want to make a game that appeals to me personally and people like me. I think so. I think my games will always be niche, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I want the people who do like it to really like it. That's my ideal anyway. That's kind of my approach. I don't know if it's if it's a good approach yet, but it seems to be working out okay.
Do you think that having limitations are important in development? For example, imposing artificial limitations on yourself, even though you could do something a certain way more efficiently, more easily, would you choose to do something in a more complex or archaic way? And if you do, why?
Oh, definitely. Very strongly think so. Just restrictions in general are a great way of stimulating creative ways of doing things. If you have some tool, some advanced special tool, you just click the button and it does the thing that you want to do. It's not terribly creative, and you're going to be doing the same thing that everyone else does that has access to that button. The hypothetical button. Well, if you have a whole bunch of limitations and you can't do something the way other people might be doing, then you have to kind of think of your own way to solve the problem. And that solution might be unique to you, and that becomes part of the identity of the thing that you're making. For
Why is
example,
that good, though?
Compound. Well, I just it gives it identity and a bit of soul and also a bit of your own personality. The personality of the person making the thing is then expressed in that the way that they approach that solution. And also, just like for instance, Compound has a lot of artificially added limitations that I added because they remind me of things that are very dear to me. Especially the obvious one is visually low resolution textures and the limited palette and the lack of transparencies and stuff. I mean, obviously, modern computers don't have any problem with having millions of colors and high resolution textures and things like that. But yeah, I wanted to go for a particular look, but also I found like while making a lot of features, I would go, oh wait a minute, I can't. I want to do something that was very common for modern games, or something that's very common for VR games. Everyone else has made it using modern tools. I'm like, well hold on, how do I do this with these strange restrictions that I put on myself? And so that led to a lot of kind of different ideas and different kind of ways of doing things and presenting things, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And also, I think that comes through in the game. I think where it has a strong, unique identity, and also screenshots. I think while they don't, I mean, in my opinion, screenshots don't do justice to the game at all. And I think those limitations made me do a lot of unique visual decisions, which then made it stand out in the end. Yeah, there's definitely all sorts of benefits like that, but just yeah, creatively as well, it makes you not become complacent creatively. Hmm.
Interesting to say. So, if I were a fresh new dev looking to get into the industry and I wanted to ship my game, I wanted to get it made and get it out there ASAP so that I can see how it's received and hopefully earn some money. Why would I still feel it to be preferable to do the more complex things, as you described, or the things that may potentially take longer for me to get to the result that I want? Why would I still want to do that, though? What benefit would it be to me as a dev?
Well, it kind of connects back to what I was saying earlier. This is just my opinion, but
Of course.
this is purely from a visual point of view. If you have something that's very different to what everyone else is doing, uniquely visual, I mean, sorry, visually unique, then you're more likely to get people to give that first click and to give you that first bit of attention. Yeah, and then obviously you can get them hooked with your, your
Mm.
gameplay. Or it doesn't matter how good it looks, though. I mean, if it's not actually
If it's not fun to
nice,
play, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, or generally not nice. So,
If you want to take the what we're saying to the extreme, the easiest thing to do and the least complex thing to do would be to the instant I say it, you'll know how this is a bad idea. Is to go on the asset store and download a bunch of assets
mm,
and then throw them in your game,
hmm,
and and obviously that happens a lot, and that's even got
hmm,
it's got the name of an asset flip, right? Because it's people instantly recognize when something hasn't had love and attention,
yes, we
put towards it.
do.
Yeah. And obviously, then the other thing is to go, oh well, ideally, in an ideal world, you'll make this amazing graphics game, and all the assets are handmade, and they're amazing. They look so good, but then that's also very difficult for a single person to do.
Yeah.
The AAA studios have huge amounts of people just doing one thing, like high poly models, and this other person that just does weapon textures or something, and to try and compete with that is impossible. And so if you try to make very, very good graphics, unless you're a very, very talented 3D modeler and texture and stuff, then you're not going to be able to compete with that either. And it'll end up looking like trying to look very, very good, but not quite getting there ends up looking really bad, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Like falling short of AAA almost looks worse than bad graphics. Like, where it's people can see that you're reaching for that top shelf look, and you're not getting there. You're setting these high expectations and they're not reaching them. People go, "Oh, this is bad." Well, if you go for some abstract look, in my case, it's pixel art look, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be anything that's unique and abstract and interesting. Because
And
if you
stylish.
abstract things out, the human brain will extrapolate for you, and also like it can be artistic and interesting. I mean, I know when VR first popped up, there was that low poly look that was very popular at the time. The job simulator kind of look, and there was a reason for that. I mean, it's quick to make assets, and it runs fast on low end hardware on VR that's very demanding, and it doesn't take very long to make assets and all that sort of stuff. But it looked unique, but because everyone did it, it stopped being unique. So finding something that's drawing inspiration from something that you personally like, that is also abstract enough that it's not too difficult and also looks very unique and interesting, is something I think is very important.
Hmm.
Um, which it's just a shame, because I want to say the most important thing is gameplay, and of course it is. But if your game looks like an asset flip, then people will assume it's an asset flip, and they
Yeah.
won't play it in the first place, and they won't know that the gameplay is really good. So yeah, so half of the problem is making a very good game, and the other half is making people want to pay attention to it in the first place. Yeah. Hmm.
Speaking of early access, I've expressed publicly before in certain words that as much as the idea of early access is a lovely one, I generally feel that it's been corrupted and is mostly abused by a lot of devs and perpetuated by players that have low standards who turn into white knights and defend said games and communities. From your side of things, what's your feeling on early access as a whole?
Well, I mean, early access allowed me to make my game, right? So I can't say anything negative about early access because it allowed my game to exist. It allowed me to do this job, which is my dream job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tool like anything else. I mean, a tool can be used correctly or it can be abused. To people, to devs who have just bailed on early access, or
Yeah.
and it's really frustrating for me because I've bought a game and I was promised something and they didn't deliver on the promise. And for me, it's a double whammy of I didn't get the game I paid for, or it was promised.
Mm.
I don't have to get it on time. I don't even have to, like, it could be super late. I mean, I don't care if the dev takes 5, 10 years, whatever, as long as they eventually make it, right? And so not delivering on the promise, but also another thing that's personally for me is very frustrating is then people go, oh, this is what I get for buying an early access game. And then early access as a whole loses value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's very frustrating for me because I mean, early access does have a place for certain genres of games, certain types of games, certain types of devs. It definitely made Compound just so much better than it would have been if it wasn't early access. Because I had so much feedback from so many people and so many, and all of it was so good, and so many ideas and stuff that came from suggestions. Most of the ideas came from suggestions, and even things things that I would think of entirely myself and then implement it, and then I'd put it on like the test branch and maybe put it on Discord or whatever, and say, "Oh, what do you think?" And then people go, "Oh, this is really cool. What if you did this and added this?" And I'm like, "Oh, what did I think of that?" So many ideas that I'm like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I didn't think of that. It's such a good idea," and they've just been directly added to the game. So, like that kind of feedback is super helpful. But I mean, you do get devs that enter early access and then they ignore everybody.
Which is
I
not
mean,
necessarily a bad thing
mm,
if they have a very focused and strong vision, irrespective of whether that's good or successful or not. I think there's definitely a very important place for that laser focus, almost arrogance, when it comes down to art forms, especially. I mean, you
mm,
can imagine
it,
if Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, if he asked for feedback on how to paint his stuff prior to actually doing it, you can imagine it probably would have turned out very differently, for maybe for better or worse. But anyway, yeah. Go on, go on.
what you're saying with it, where you can't let your idea be diluted too much. But I
Mm,
mean, there's a difference between doing what people tell you to do and taking the best ideas that people give you that you like yourself. Like if someone gives you an idea that's just you think, oh, that's just better in every single way, and you really the person whose idea that the game is, or the person, the visionary or whatever, is who control of the creative process of the game. If they think, in my case, if I come across an idea that I'm like, oh, this is just straight up better in every way to what I was planning. Are they telling me what to do, or have I just encountered a better idea that I've decided to implement? Like, I mean, they haven't told me to implement it, right? I mean, they have maybe, but I've decided to take that. I mean, I don't just implement everything everyone tells me to do. And I reject more ideas than I accept
of
by
course.
a long margin. But I don't think anyone is good enough to get nothing at all from a huge amount of feedback. Like
Yeah.
you'd have to. Well, I mean, maybe there are, but I mean, personally, I'm not smart enough or creative enough to get feedback from hundreds and thousands of people and then get absolutely nothing from any of that.
Mm,
There's lots of noise. I mean, I'm not going to say that there's lots of things that I'm like, I don't know about that. But even then, if it's something that I really strongly just, I'm like, no, I still appreciate the idea or the,
mm,
the the effort. I think early access, when used correctly, is a very good tool.
mm. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
as you say, there are lots of there. I mean, there are plenty of devs that are abusive about it, or like you don't have to respond. I mean, that's the dev's choice, right? But not even looking at the feedback kind of seems a bit strange for me personally. I feel like there are a whole bunch of people giving their opinions, and thoughts that you can agree with or disagree with, but they're still like food for thought, right? They're things that can, even if you don't use any of those ideas or thoughts, you can look at that and then you can, use that as the starting point to branch off your own thoughts and have your own ideas, maybe. But it's still, I think there's still value, even if you're that kind of person, to at least, looking. um, for me personally, I have benefited just so much from early access, and I wouldn't want to
Mm.
veer off that formula too far.
Yeah.
Mm,
In regards to being a dev who would
mm.
likely be exposed to a lot of feedback from players in various forms and contexts, how do you pass the feedback that you get? How do you manage what feedback to take from players? And how do you identify that which is not worth considering?
Feedback, all kinds of feedback, is not wrong. It's never wrong because it's always the
Of
opinion of the
course.
person saying it. So you can only look at that as inspiration or information to inform your decisions. Like, I mean, feedback, you can't use feedback to make the decisions of a developer. You can't, because then it just becomes designed by committee, and that never works out.
Hmm. Which seems
But
to be the
I,
norm for the industry, or at least the culture these days, because of how easy it is for players to express themselves and communicate and form the little communities and such.
I consider every opinion always.
Is that not exhausting?
Extremely. It's the least favorite part of my job. I
Yeah.
hate it, but it's important, right? Like I even if it's abusive, I mean, I look at why they felt they needed to abuse me, that they felt so strongly about this particular thing. And every decision I make about the game, I don't let anyone make a decision for me, but I do let people weigh in on my decision, if you know what I mean. I'll read what they say and I'll think about what they're saying, and I'll try and think about the face value of it, and also maybe what's behind those thoughts as well. And then I'll see how that idea interacts with my internal idea of what the game should be, and whether that is something I want to act on, or if it's not, or if it's something I don't want to directly do, but maybe that's inspired me to do some other change to address what they're trying to say in a totally different way. Because I mean, I think we've discussed this before, where people sometimes don't know what they want,
Yeah.
or sometimes there's something that they don't like,
Most of the
and
time, I'd say.
I accept that there's something they don't like, and then they suggest a solution for it. And sometimes, I mean, those solutions are really good. I mean, some people have really good ideas all the time,
Hmm.
and sometimes, I mean, a lot of the time, they'll just be a straight up really good idea, and I'm like, oh, okay, 100% agree with everything you say, and that solution, fine, good, okay, done. But sometimes it'll be, I'll agree with their problem, but then I'll have a different approach for the solution. Because I mean, obviously, I can see inside the game, and I can see all the parts and how they interact together. So sometimes there is that insight can give you more options to solve the same problem in a way that might be better. Or maybe, a lot of people will all say things that I disagree with individually, but as a whole, reading through those things that I disagree with has guided my thoughts into a different direction. Or maybe I disagree with something so hard that it makes me think about why I disagree with that, and that sort of helps reinforce ideas that I had, or maybe change my mind on things. But it's just,
Excellent.
I mean, it's every single. I mean, that's why feedback is the part that I like least about my job. But it's also super, super important, is that you have to take every single one on a case by case basis. And so you have to, so it's very emotionally and mentally draining. Well, because I'm making a game is a creative thing,
Yeah.
and that's fun for me. It is a bit stressful to sort of emotionally and kind of, interact with people that you don't know online, even when it's positive stuff. I mean, it's great to have like people just sometimes just drop by, not feedback, just be like, "Oh, thanks for making this game," and
Yeah.
that's really nice. But it's still, yeah, it's the most difficult part of my job is the feedback.
Did you have any particular philosophies that you adhered to which were important to you?
I guess you could call it a philosophy. That is not oversubscribing to any these ideas in game development circles of this is this rule and games must be developed in this way, or this method, or kind of the best practices, and things like that. I don't really like that too much because I feel like it suppresses my personal creative process a bit too much. I like to make everything up as I go, which
Hmm.
sounds like chaos, but that's how I like to work. And I think that makes me stumble across things that I wouldn't have if I'd overplanned things. I think if I sat down there with a document or a Word document or something, and I wrote down everything I was going to put into the game, then it would become much more generic, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Well, if you're just playing with things and making stuff up as you go, you kind of go, "Oh, what happens if I do this?" Or,
Yeah.
maybe I'll try this, and or maybe you have like some strange bug that turns out to be really fun, and even if you don't turn that into a feature, it could inspire you to do something else. It could be the seed of an idea. So yeah, my philosophy is no philosophy.
That's such a
Just
wonderful attitude. It really is. It is exactly kind of, it makes perfect sense for a game, because that kind of attitude of not binding yourself to certain best practices and being playful with the process of making the game would seem very obviously lend itself to the process, because if you're playful in the making process, then that will reflect in the result of the game that we play, also being more playful and creative as well. So it's great. I think it makes perfect sense.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, that's I strongly agree with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I do. Yeah, that's a very good way of saying it. I do play a lot when I make anything. Yeah, I find I actually I I like I'll make some new feature, or I'll play with something, or I'll try something out, and I'll have to test it in game, see how it feels. And I find I start doing other things and mucking around with other things that have nothing to do with what I was testing or making, and that will lead me down some other random side path, and I start making some other feature that wasn't even planned for that day. Yeah, yeah, so the idea of playing, like not just playing your own game, but playing with your own game and playing with the process of making it, playing with the process of making a game is a good way of expressing what I do.
There was something that you mentioned earlier about in the last 10 to 20 years of games losing their soul almost, but you couldn't quite put it into words. And I feel exactly the same way as well. You're probably unsurprised to hear. Something has gone missing. I do have theories on what's happened there. It's a multi layered thing. Probably not best to go into it now.
I have one short theory.
Go for it.
It's boiled down very much and
Hmm.
oversimplified,
Hmm.
but the general idea that I have is that if the people who are making the thing, whether it be a computer game or otherwise, if they're having fun making it, then the player or the viewer or whatever will pick up on that.
Hmm.
And inversely, if the people making this piece of entertainment are not enjoying what they're doing, like if it's just become like the 9 to 5 grind that they do,
Hmm.
then you'll also be able to pick up on that. And that's why I think a lot of the giant triple A's are losing that special something, is that all of the tiny cogs in the machine are not really having a very good time.
Yeah.
While a small group of indies are very passionate about what they're making, and a lot of time, they like what they're doing and they're having fun what they're doing, and that's communicated to the player. And in movies as well. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is Army of Darkness.
Haven't seen that one.
Uh, it's a ridiculous movie. It's completely stupid, and you can tell they weren't taking themselves very seriously at all when they made it. It's so ridiculous. I love it. It's just you can tell that they had so much fun making it, and they weren't taking themselves too seriously. It's in every fiber of the movie is this
Hmm.
silliness. It's completely over the top, and I strongly recommend it to anyone who's into that kind of vibe. It's completely ridiculous and stupid in the best possible way.
Noted.
And I think games can also benefit from having that kind of vibe.
Of all the VR games that you've played, which one did you like the most and why?
I would say Alex. I mean, Alex was the best simply because it delivered the best of what I want, and that
Hmm.
is to go on an adventure, to be in a different world. It's like a fantasy, right? For me, the ideal game is a little bit power fantasy, and it's a little bit of an adventure in some other place.
Mm-hmm.
I think Alex does that the best. Alex is not perfect. A lot of people think that Boneworks is a better game, and I understand where they're coming from. Boneworks is better at showing you what VR is capable of being,
Mm.
while Alex very, very firmly has the training wheels left on.
Yeah.
They're playing it very safe, and I can understand why, because I think it's designed to be many people's first VR game, and I think they were very afraid of making people sick
Mm-hmm.
to the point where they've held back a lot in terms of gameplay. It's a very, very easy game. To me, it was. I mean, even on the hardest difficulty, it
Oh, yeah.
felt
Yeah.
extremely
Very
easy.
easy.
And yeah, and in terms of movement and things, it's very, very, very limited. But immersion from the very, very convincing world was enough to transcend all of that
Mm-hmm.
and make it one of my favorite games of all time. I mean, at the time when I finished it, at that moment, it was the best gaming experience of my life. I think because it was. I was there, you know. I was. I mean, obviously, I knew I was playing a computer game, but more than any other computer game, I was transported to another place,
Mm-hmm.
and that's ultimately what I like most about computer games: is being taken to another place and having an adventure there, or you know, or doing impossible things there. Yeah, so that would be my pick. Easily would be Alex. So my ideal game would be something like Alex with all the training wheels off,
Mm-hmm.
and taking a lot more inspiration from things like Boneworks, where it's 100% physical and without the rough edges that Boneworks has. I mean, Boneworks is pushing the envelope so
Mm.
far that, I mean, some of the cracks do show, but yeah, it's no doubt that they've sort of shown the way of where where you can go. Hmm.
Bevan, thank you
Hmm.
very, 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 very much for joining me on this. It's been very insightful and a great pleasure to speak with you, especially as someone who is quite publicly critical of VR with a level of uncertainty because I don't really know how feasible things are or what goes on under the surface. So I really appreciate you coming to help enlighten me there. It's much appreciated. It's
Not at
been
all. I had a great time talking to you. Actually, it was very interesting.
great. Well, then, thank you again for coming and for those of you who are listening, and take care.